What's going on, everyone? Welcome, excuse me. Welcome to the Monday, July 7th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 9-game MLB slate tonight. I'm going to go game by game if I can talk, which apparently is an issue now. Hadn't been all day, but now that the show has started, can't speak. So going to try and get through it. Allergies are not great. I have been visiting my mom's house, and the dog always makes that a problem. But going to power through it. Hopefully can keep my voice. Going to go game by game as usual. Did build some lineups. Take a look at how I'd be approaching the slate if it started right now. Obviously, all of that is subject to change. Ownership will change throughout the day. Lineups will come out. Players will disappear. Other players will appear. But going to go through game by game, taking a look at how I'd be approaching it right now. Also, that'll give us a chance to see where maybe there are some ownership discrepancies. Commented on Twitter yesterday about just how god-awful ownership projections are now, which isn't really anyone's fault. It's just a matter of the way people play DFS changing, and I think old ownership models not really being in sync anymore. So if I notice anything that stands out there, I will mention that as well. Going to use the Run the Sims projections as usual, as you see on the screen. You can sign up for those using the link in the description below. 2 subscription options there. $100 a month gets you the full subscriptions package, fully detailed projections straight out of our in-house play-by-play Sims. Those are what you see on the screen. Download them, upload them into whatever lineup builder, sim, optimizer, whatever you use. You can use them for sports betting as well if you want to go that route. If that doesn't make sense for you, you don't play enough volume, whatever. We do also have the MLB Draft Caddy option. That's $10 a month. It just overlays the DraftKings projection directly onto your DraftKings lineups page. So you get access to the final projection. You can use it to hand build your lineups, late swap, all that kind of stuff. That is also included in the full subscriptions package as well. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. Get notifications when shows go live, as Nathaniel just mentioned. That helps out a lot, especially because showtimes kind of vary, at least for right now. I am going to try and start doing these a little bit earlier in the morning. Didn't work out today, but I do like doing these early shows. I know you guys have said that is better for you as well. So going to get into it, starting with the Rockies taking on the Red Sox in Boston. So not Coors Field, but still a good park for offense. Also good pitching for offense in this one, with Austin Gomber going for the Rockies, Dick Fitz going for the Red Sox. Obviously a good matchup for Fitz. The Rockies are terrible. You're getting them outside of Coors Field. All of that is good. Low 4s team total for the Rockies. Fitz only coming in at $6,200, getting about 6% ownership right now. He's showing up in about 5% of my lineups. So pretty even with the field on Fitz. There's nothing really that stands out about him as a pitcher. There's nothing that looks particularly good there, but he's not terrible, and the Rockies are. So it's a pitcher facing the Rockies outside of Coors. He's cheap. If you need a cheap SP2, you can click him into lineups and hope for the best against this Colorado team. On the other side, Austin Gomber's only $4,500. That is too cheap for a starting pitcher, even though he's not a particularly good one, and it's not a great matchup against the Red Sox. It's not a good park to pitch in Fenway. He's not getting any ownership right now. He's in like 8% of my lineups, talking about how I'd be attacking the large $8 50K to first tournament or $5, whatever it is today, on DraftKings. Large field tournament, no ownership, very cheap. I have a little bit of Gomber, but that's also the kind of thing that could just disappear throughout the day as well. If that ownership projection comes up a little bit, that probably gets rid of him. But also, as you get lineups released, you do generally find more hitting value because you just get unexpected starters that are cheaper than the players that were projected in. And so the need for dirt cheap SP2s tends to go away as lineups are released as well. But Gomber at 4,500 in an emergency, projects for about 10 fantasy points. So good point per dollar play, just still obviously a low actual projection on him. So getting sub 10% to both of the pitchers here. Now, offensively, this is obviously a good spot, particularly for Boston. But starting on the Colorado side, basically 5 to 10% projected ownership coming in to most of the Rockies going up against Fitz. Going back to last year, very limited sample here. Hasn't spent much time in the majors, but Fitz has allowed more power, expected power, and actual power two right-handed hitters. He is a right-handed pitcher, so there's a good chance that these numbers do converge and he ends up being either neutral or a traditional splits guy. That is generally your assumption when you're dealing with small sample sizes. But so far, he has given up more power to righties. 262 expected ISO to right-handed hitters so far, sub 100 to lefties. Hunter Goodman, Tyler Freeman, Jordan Beck, all in about 10% of my lineups at 6 to 8% ownership. Ryan McMahon, Tyro Estrada, Brenton Doyle all showing up 6 to 7% of the time as well, pretty much around the same as the field on them. So Colorado looking like a secondary option here. Goodman in particular, though, I think does look good. Like he's actually a good hitter. Obviously, getting out of Coors Field isn't ideal for Rockies bats, but they are still in a good hitting environment overall. So I do think that Goodman looks good at catcher. He is $5,100, so he's not exactly cheap. Tyler Freeman is day to day, may or may not end up in the lineup. But the top of the order for the Rockies, I think, is fine here. Again, Fitz not a great pitcher. The park is good. And most of the bats at the top of the order for Colorado are at least decent. They're not great. They probably aren't as good as, in some of their cases, as their salaries suggest. Like Tyler Freeman, if he played his home games outside of Coors Field, would not be a $4,500 DFS player. Hunter Goodman would not be $5,100, but they are still decent, especially if they're at the top of the order. The Red Sox side is the really interesting one here. They are projected to be popular. I think it's likely that they end up being even more popular than they are being projected for. Right now, basically 10 to 15% projected ownership to all of the Red Sox bats. Romy Gonzalez higher than that at about 25% at 4,400 with first base and second base eligibility. Just taking a quick look, though, at some of the public sim tools, they have the Red Sox going on their own, even at 10 to 15% ownership. I think it's very likely that you see Red Sox ownership come even higher than is projected right now. Whether ownership projections adjust to that throughout the day or not, I don't know. But it is a spot that I will be keeping an eye on. It stands out as the primary team that I think you just kind of see get a Sims bump in ownership, at least with the way things look right now, where even though they're projected to be popular, 10 to 15% ownership is kind of like what they would be 3 years ago. And then you have Sims tools that everyone is using saying, hey, I know they're popular, but they're not popular enough. You should play more of them. And I think you just see them get driven up even more because they are one of the highest projected teams and one of the highest point per dollar teams. And that's generally the combination that really drives things up when people are using Sims. And Boston's checking both of those right now. Like if you look, at the Red Sox here, even in our projections, which obviously don't influence the field as much as other sites because they're just not nearly as widely used as popular, which is one thing I like about using them. But even in ours, like you can see here, if you look at the point per dollar projections, this entire Red Sox lineup outside of Meyer, who's just shy, projects for more than 2 fantasy points per dollar. So that is going to drive them up. And then the raw fantasy point projections are relatively high as well. So, this is a team with a 5.5 to a 6 team total. So I do think the Red Sox end up coming in, like I said, they're projected 10 to 15%. I think you'll see them come in around 20, 25%. And then in your small field, higher buy-in stuff, probably even higher than that. So this is a team where if ownership projections don't change throughout the day, I will be changing them on my own in my stuff. But the Red Sox are a good stack. Like I don't want, that ends up being a whole separate conversation too. You just have to be aware of the ownership and that the ownership probably isn't going to be as low as it's being projected. Clearly, they're good, though. Like they have one of the highest totals on the slate. They're some of the best point per dollar options. It's just a matter of can you find ways to navigate the ownership? And you should be aware that the ownership is probably going to be higher than is being projected in the industry. Gregory Lynch said, can you briefly talk about FanDuel pitching for the main slate? I can. I mean, with the caveat that I haven't actually looked at anything, but I will at the end of the show pull up our FanDuel projections and take a look at pitching projections over there with the pricing as well. But yeah, off the top of my head, I don't have anything because I haven't looked. But I will pull that up later at the end of the show when I recap everything. Jake said projected ownership is going to converge toward portfolio exposures. I don't think that's the case yet. I think that's still a ways down the road, and then that'll kind of just be like a reset. SaberSim introduced a diversification tool we will have one in our sim stuff. But as far as I know, Stochastic still doesn't. And I know obviously they're really popular. They drive a lot of stuff in the industry. So I don't think you're going to see that happen yet. I think eventually it will. But I think you're still at this point in the stage where if Sims tell you a team is good, you're just going to get the field like playing that team at way too high of a rate compared to how they should if they were handling their exposures remotely responsibly. But, getting back to it with Boston, just talking from like a projection standpoint, a matchup standpoint, they're great. They are as popular as they are because they're one of the best point per dollar teams. They're one of the best offensive teams. The matchup with Gomber is solid. Hitting in Fenway Park is solid. 210 expected ISO to right-handed hitters from Gomber since last season. 224 to lefties. So you don't have to shy away from Jarren Duran or Meyer or other left-handed bats in this lineup. It's just completely a problem of, can you navigate the ownership here and still make lineups that are good? And really what I guess you're pointing out, like if you are somebody that uses sim tools, keep in mind that if you're using baseline ownership, you're just going to have inflated simulated ROIs on these Boston stacks, most likely. So if you account for that, like for me, if I end up projecting Boston to be 20-25% owned, and then they're still simulating as positive stacks, at that point, sure, like I'm going to play them. But I want to make sure that I have, as good an input as I can. You want to keep in mind when you're using, whether you're using an optimizer, Sims tool, whatever, these things are still only as good as your inputs. They're not magic 8 balls. They're simply taking the information you give it and telling you the best way, the lineups that, in the case of a sim, the lineups that project for the best ROI with the inputs you gave it. So if you give it shitty inputs on Boston that are half, ownership is half of what it actually will be, it's going to tell you Boston's great. If you put in inflated ownership and it still tells you Boston's great, then you can at least feel a little bit better about saying, okay, look, I know Boston's really popular. It's annoying, but they still look really good. But you still obviously want to be putting in the best inputs that you can. Gonzalez, for me, this is without me adjusting ownership. This is with using just baseline ownership. I'm still a little under the field on Boston right now. 16% Romy Gonzalez, my highest bat from the Red Sox, projected for 24%. Trevor Story showing up 14% for me. That's about even with the field. Narvaez, Ref Snyder, both around 10%, slightly below the field. And then getting 5 to 10% on Duran, Anthony, Rafaela, Toro. So I'm still getting to Boston some, but not quite as much as the field at their baseline ownership. Chances are once I up that ownership a little bit more, I'll end up getting a little bit less. But again, that's not a comfortable spot to be in. It's very obviously a good spot here against Gomber and also a weak Boston bullpen behind them. Good question here from Einsteinium too. He said, if you believe Boston will come in higher, what does that do to pitchers like DeGrom and Yusei? So that's that's another thing that you want to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about how to handle Boston is, if you still want to play Boston and you're aware that they're probably going to be more popular than projected, one way you can do that is to then say, okay, well, I'm going to play less DeGrom. I'm going to play less Kikuchi, because you really want to be aware of, am I playing this under-projected stack with chalk pitching? Like those are the teams that in your pre-contest sims look really good. And then in your post-contest sims, they're really bad. If you are aware Boston's going to be more popular probably than projected, and as a result, you pair them with low-owned pitching, you're not going to take the same sort of post-contest ROI hit, sim ROI hit that you would if you're just playing what ends up being a team that is 60% owner, pitching and 30% offensive hitters across the board. As far as what I think it'll do to pitchers like DeGrom and Kikuchi, their ownership, I don't think it really has an impact because for the most part, people I don't think are going to handle the Boston ownership correctly. So, like as a whole, the industry is not going to they're not going to run stochastic sims and then say, hey, I know this ownership is shit, so I need to adjust and play less of the popular pitching. They're going to run stochastic or saber sim or whatever. I don't mean it as a knock on stochastic. Obviously, that's just what a lot of people use. They're not going to run it like those sims. The outputs are likely to be, hey, you should play a lot of DeGrom and you should play a lot of Boston because they're all not getting enough ownership. So I don't think for the field, they're going to be adjusting and saying, I need to not play DeGrom with Boston. Like, I don't think you're going to get an effect where Boston ownership goes up, but DeGrom ownership goes down because Boston goes up and people know that they are taking on a ton of ownership playing DeGrom in Boston. I think what's going to happen is because Boston, at least right now, their ownership isn't being projected as high as it probably should be, you're just going to get people jamming lineups that say, you can play a lot of Boston, and because you can play a lot of Boston, you can play a lot of DeGrom. So if anything, to your question, it probably actually inflates DeGrom ownership a little bit. And that is something that I saw when I was playing around with public sim tools earlier. DeGrom is actually, I think, being projected to, and Kikuchi, be either like neutrally owned or a little bit under owned. Because again, what you're actually getting from Sims tools right now is because Boston is under-owned, they're a plus EV stack. And at that point, you want to be just getting in the best plays you can around them. So if anything, I'd actually think you get kind of inflated ownership probably on those highest projected pitchers as well. So that's something to keep in mind too. Like DeGrom ownership might be a little bit lower. Ownership projection might be a little bit lower right now than it really will be. Same as possible for Kikuchi as a result. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting slate here where I do think the best plays, and again, like I don't want this to come off as me saying like I don't think Boston's a good player, I don't think DeGrom's a good player or whatever. I think there's a good chance that you kind of see them all kind of paired together and lumped together at higher rates than they should be. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of just my feel from looking at some stuff early on in the day. Miami taking on the Reds in Cincinnati, so another good park for offense. 4.5 to 5 team total for Miami, around 5 for Cincinnati as well. Not the best offenses here, but it is a good park. And Jansen Junk going for Miami, Brady Singer going for the Reds. Junk not getting any ownership. He is 6K. I am getting to some of him here. He's not a terrible pitcher. The matchup against Cincinnati isn't terrible. It is a big park downgrade for him going into Great American compared to Miami. But I am getting some of him at 6K. He's in 9% of my lineups. Not projected for any ownership right now. Maybe that ownership does come up a little bit, but I like the price tag. I like that he's been stretched out a bit by Miami. You're not talking about him just coming in and pitching 3 innings necessarily anymore or anything like that. So I do think as a value option, he looks pretty decent. He went 6 innings his last time out through 83 pitches. He's gone at least 5 innings in 3 of his last 4. He's gone at least 4 innings in every appearance since May 24th, with the exception of 1. And that wasn't necessarily a pitch count thing. It was a he pitched like shit thing. But overall, not a bad pitcher as a starter so far this season, trying to get to his Fangraphs page because a lot of his appearances this year were as like a long guy, a follower. But overall this season, striking out 21.9% of hitters, 1.83 FIP. Again, you expect him to be a little bit worse as a starter because you're going through the lineup, an extra time or possibly 2. But at this price tag, I think looks like a pretty decent value play. There is still a lot of risk because you're in Cincinnati. You have a high team total here. But if the ownership stays really low, I am interested in getting to him. I am not getting to any Brady Singer here. He's getting 8% ownership. He's 7,500. Matchup is decent against Miami. Not a great pitcher overall. Obviously not a great park. But the big difference here, I think, is just that while he's not super expensive, Singer is expensive enough. And you can see here, at least right now, we actually have Junk projected higher than Singer. Maybe that changes, in later runs and everything. But with Singer, not that he's expensive, but you're going to be able to find better point per dollar plays and certainly better, higher projected pitchers. So he kind of is just in that middle ground, at least in our projections for me right now, where he's not really checking any of the boxes that would push him into a lot of lineups. He's not a great point per dollar play. Like if I need a cheap SP2 and I'm willing to take on risk there, I'm probably going to just go cheaper and maximize my bats. So he's not showing up right now. Again, it's not a bad matchup against Miami, but he's not showing up. I am getting to a lot of Miami bats. TTID Forever said Miami's a sneaky stack. Right now they're not getting a ton of ownership, and I am getting to a lot of them. Maybe ownership changes, maybe it doesn't. I would be, if this were a spot where I were using industry projections and I saw the ownership that I'm getting, I would say that it's likely Miami's ownership comes up. But one nice thing about using projections like ours is they're not heavily used. They're not going to influence the industry as much. And I mentioned this with Boston too. So yeah, they're not going to be perfect. Like there's going to be plenty of times that we miss and industry, more popular projections hit. There's going to be plenty of times that we hit and they miss. The payoffs are different though, because if you're using projections and sims, et cetera, that a large percentage of your opponents are using, and there is a discrepancy between, say, them and us, when they hit, you're probably going to get paid off less because more people are using it. Whereas when ours hit, you're not going to have as much traffic at the top. So right now, Miami looks really good. Jesus Sanchez getting 9% projected ownership at 3,800. He's in a third of my lineups right now. He'd be my highest owned hitter if the slate started right now. Brady Singer, just not a particularly good pitcher. The park is not good. He's allowed a 232 expected ISO to left-handed hitters this year, 370 expected WOBA. Does have a 22.5% K percentage, higher strikeout percentage against lefties than righties. But also Jesus Sanchez, I think there's a tendency maybe to kind of overlook him because he's on Miami. They're not a great offense. They play in a park that isn't good for hitting, so a lot of times you don't like getting there. 225 plate appearances for Sanchez against right-handed pitching this year. 382 expected WOBA, 256 expected ISO, only a 21% K percentage. So he's generally putting the ball in play. He's getting a park upgrade here in Cincinnati. He's facing a pitcher that struggles to limit quality of contact to left-handed hitters, and he's actually hit the shit out of right-handed pitching this year. I'd like getting him a lot at $3,800. 8% projected ownership coming into Agustin Ramirez at 4K. Power hitting catcher option at 4K on 2x or 3x the field there. Kyle Stowers, 4,400 in the outfield, getting 7% ownership. I'm at 16%. He, against right-handed pitching this year, has a 310 expected ISO, 398 expected WOBA. He does strike out a lot, 32% K percentage, but he's hitting the ball very hard when he makes contact. You're not getting a lot of ownership there. Xavier Edwards on 2x the field, getting to 15% of him. I'm 2x on Otto Lopez, getting to 13%. I'm 2x on Wagaman, getting to 7%. Even with the field on Connor Norby, getting to 4%. So I'm getting a lot of Miami here. They are cheap. They have a high ceiling. To me, this is a really strong counter to the Red Sox. Not that they're as good as the Red Sox. Their team total's like a run lower than Boston is. If you're playing cash games, you prefer the Red Sox. If somebody were to just give you even money and come to you and say, hey, do you think the Red Sox hitters or the Marlins hitters score more fantasy points tonight? You're taking the Red Sox. But this isn't an even money bet because it's very likely that you get 2 to 3 times the ownership on Red Sox hitters compared to Miami hitters tonight. And from a value standpoint, you have very similar pricing to Miami. The most expensive hitter on the Marlins is Stowers at 4,400. So you can go to this Miami stack and still get the highest upside pitching options. You can get very good one-offs or mini stacks. You can go to expensive stacks and backfill with Miami. So you can use them in the same way that people are going to use the Red Sox. And yes, they are a little bit less likely to succeed, but when they do succeed, your payoffs are going to look better. Jake asked how Singer is at preventing stolen bases. So far this season, Singer has allowed 8 stolen bases in 88 and 2/3 innings pitched. In the past, he's graded out as average to above average at preventing steals. This year, he's actually been a little bit below average. If we scroll over here in our projections, we don't have super high stolen base projections on anybody. Xavier Edwards is at the top at 0.18. For Edwards, that's a relatively low projection. So we still have Singer being pretty good at preventing stolen bases, I think. But he has, been worse this year so far, at least, than he has in the past. So I do actually like to see that the stolen bases aren't what's driving the projections here because, he's historically not been terrible at it. It's a good park for power. It's a park upgrade for this team. I think they're pretty clearly underpriced here relative to the upside that they offer. So I do like getting to them. On the Cincinnati side, actually, one thing I wanted to check here too is I wanted to pull up the Reds bullpen. Cincinnati has 3 left-handed pitchers in their bullpen. They should all be available today. So that is a negative for guys like Stowers, like Sanchez. You probably can get lefties in there later on in the game to match up with them. But, it doesn't apply to the right-handed bats, obviously, Ramirez, Lopez, Edwards. That is a slight negative for Sanchez and Stowers. But again, that is factored in to our projections as well. The way that our projections are generated is from our in-house sim. We have logic in there for when a starting pitcher is removed. We know what pitchers are likely available in the opposing bullpen. So we did model for lefty-lefty matchups later on for Sanchez and Stowers. They're not guys that are likely to be pinch hit for, which is nice. It's just that you're getting, a less than perfect matchup at some point later on in the game, most likely. We do actually have a pretty high pinch hit percentage on Sanchez here. For Stowers, it's lower. But again, that's a function of just how many lefties they have in the bullpen. They are likely to get to a lefty at some point in this game. It's a matter of whether or not Miami pinch hits for them or just leaves them in. Obviously, lower pinch hit percentages on the right-handed bats here. You don't have to worry about it. On the Cincinnati side, 14% projected ownership coming into Elly De La Cruz. I am right in line with that, getting to him 14% of the time. $5,900 price tag, obviously expensive, but massive ceiling. You don't need me to tell you that Elly De La Cruz gives you a ton of home run upside, gives you a ton of stolen base upside as well. 0.25 home run projection in our model, 0.3 stolen base projection. All of that goes without saying. And then you're getting 5 to 10% ownership on pretty much the rest of the Reds. I'm around 5% on most of them. Steer, Lux, McLean, Marte, Friedel, all 4 to 5% owned for me. So I think the Reds are fine. They are also cheap. They are in this park. Outside of De La Cruz, the most expensive guy is Hayes at 4,800. Outside of him, it's Friedel at 4,200. So if you wanted to, go to the Reds for value, I do think that that's fine as well. But Miami's the side of this game that I'm getting more of. I did forget to touch on it earlier too. Somebody asked about Nate Eaton pinch hit projection in our model. Right now, in our early run at least, and again, keep in mind it's early in the day, we have him not, our data provider doesn't have him in, so can't answer that question for you. For the show, I use the SaberSim projected lineups since that's what I use to build my lineups. And it just becomes a whole logistical issue if I'm using different lineups than they have. But our lineup provider doesn't have Eaton in, so I can't answer the pinch hit question for you there. Probably relatively high if he does end up being in, but don't have a number for you on that, unfortunately. Boston doesn't have the same sort of pinch hit flexibility now that they did, earlier in the season. So lower than it would have been 2 months ago. But it really depends on what exactly the lineup is, what position he's playing, etc. Probably relatively high, probably not crazy high, but I'm not sure. Don't have him in our projected lineup at the moment. Pittsburgh taking on Kansas City. In Kansas City, Noah Cameron going for the Royals. Andrew Heaney going for the Pirates. $6,500 price tag on Heaney. $8,100 price tag on Cameron, who continues to be priced up a little bit because of his magical run at preventing earned runs. But $8,100 here against Pittsburgh, I don't think is a crazy price tag or anything like that. He's getting 7% ownership. I'm not getting to him here. You are in Kansas City, which is a good park for scoring runs, a bad park for getting strikeouts. The matchup itself against Pittsburgh is fine. Against left-handed pitching since the start of last season, the Pirates' active roster is 6th in strikeout percentage. They are 25th in WRC+. So it is a good matchup for Cameron. But at 8,100, he's just not somebody that is showing up for me much right now. I would throw him in that bucket of, mid-range pitchers getting 7% ownership, where if he fits into a lineup for you, fine. I wouldn't actively avoid him or anything like that. There is one pitcher that I know I'm getting a lot of that we are higher on than the industry right now that is kind of making it, I think, not necessary for me to get to a lot of these other mid-range guys because we just have such a strong preference for him, and I'll get to that one later. But it's one of those where you have to keep in mind that not only when I'm talking about my exposures, is it early in the day, but whenever anybody is talking about their exposures or whenever you're looking back at what, if you think there's a player that is good and you want to try and model your DFS game after them, you still have to keep in mind that there's a ton of assumptions that go into everything. And it's usually not, I don't think Noah Cameron is a good play, so I have 0. I think XYZ is better, so I have more of them. So that is a function here where just absolutely jamming somebody later and chats onto it. That is making it not necessary for me to have much of anybody else. So if you are not on the same page and you don't want 70% Christopher Sanchez, then mix in some Noah Cameron. The matchup is good. The park is not ideal, but matchup's good. Cameron's fine. Like, he projects as a 20-21% K guy, I believe. Just kind of a guy. He's gotten really lucky so far in terms of run prevention, which is part of the reason that he's 8,100 and not like 7,300. 19% strikeout percentage so far. 4.32 xFIP is not terrible. It's just, not $8,100. He has a 2.56 ERA that is driving the salary up. But very, very long way of saying, if you want to play some Noah Cameron, he's fine. Like 5 to 10% ownership is the projection. It's probably what he should have. It's probably efficient. On the other side, Heaney, not getting any ownership. I don't have him either. It's not a good strikeout matchup. He is an okay strikeout pitcher, but Kansas City doesn't strike out a lot. The park is not good for getting strikeouts. And you also just have other cheap options on this slate. Like I said, I'm getting to some Jansen junk here against Cincinnati. If you, I guess, wanted to just play Heaney instead, like, fine. He probably beats junk, a decent percentage of the time. But we have junk projected higher. We like the matchup better against Cincinnati, even though, it is a scary park for allowing runs. Offensively here, Kansas City is a team that I seemingly always get to. Starting on the Pittsburgh side, I'm getting a little bit over the field on the main pieces there. Nick Gonzalez getting 6% ownership. I'm getting to 12, 13%. 3,500 second base option going up against left-handed Cameron. We have still a pretty low pitch hit percentage on Gonzalez, so not really worried about that here. He's probably hitting in the middle of the order at 3,500. So I don't mind getting to him as a relatively low-owned value play. It's not a great park for hitting home runs, but you can get plenty of hits in general. Batting average on balls in play is going to tend to elevate a little bit here. You can still get, doubles, triples in this park. Cameron so far has been good at limiting right-handed power. He's thrown his changeup 26% of the time to right-handed hitters, only a 138 expected ISO. So again, I don't love the spot here, but I do like the price tag. I like the fact that Gonzalez is probably hitting in the middle of the order. And so as a relatively low-owned value piece, I think that's fine. Brian Hayes getting 3% ownership. I'm at 9. McCutchen getting 5%. I'm at 9. Pham getting 6%. I'm at 8. Cruz getting 4%. I'm at 7. I will single out Cruz here. Cameron has, so far this season, allowed a 222, limited sample, but has allowed a 222 expected ISO to left-handed hitters. That is much higher than I mentioned for righties. Not totally surprising given the reliance on the changeup to right-handed hitters. So again, I don't think you go out of your way and just like jam in O'Neal Cruz or anything. But if you are going to the Pirates, don't just look at O'Neal Cruz, say, lefty, I don't want it. Cameron has actually been vulnerable to left-handed power. Cruz gives you stolen base upside. Obviously you can get right-handed matchups against Cruz later in the game. Anyway, still a very high upside play. But I did want to point out that through the very limited sample, lefty has actually been a problem for Cameron in terms of power numbers allowed. I'm getting to 7%. Reynolds at 6%, 5%. Davis at 3%. So for the most part, just getting to like 5 to 10% of these Pirates bats at around like 5% projected ownership. On the other side for Kansas City against Heaney, 17% ownership coming into Bobby Witt Jr., 12% coming into Salvador Perez, 10% apiece to Garcia and to India. Those are the high marks. And for the most part, I'm in line with most of that. 21% Bobby Witt Jr. leading the way for me at $5,400. It's Bobby Witt. Stolen base upside is there. Power upside is there. 154 expected ISO to righties so far for Heaney this year. It is worth pointing out that Heaney has just become an entirely different pitcher than he used to be. Basically the exact opposite of what he once was. He used to be a guy that would strike out like 30% of the hitters that he faced. And if you didn't strike out, you probably hit the ball really hard and pretty likely to hit a home run against him. Now he's a low K guy that doesn't give up a lot of quality contact. 18.8% K percentage against righties this year, but only a 154 expected ISO, 322 expected WOBA. So he has just kind of recreated himself as the polar opposite of what he used to be. But it's still a relatively inexpensive price tag for Witt, given the power and stolen base upside that he gives you. Michael Garcia, same thing, has some power, obviously not to the extent of Witt, but also has some stolen base upside. Getting 10% ownership, I'm at 12%. If we flip over to the Kansas City bats here, scroll over, look at the stolen base projections that we have here. Not crazy high, but still relatively high on Witt and Garcia. And honestly, again, like I like when I'm getting to guys and their stolen base projections look like this, almost a little more than I like when I'm getting to them and we have like a crazy high stolen base projection, because you run in, again, I think I like our projections. I think they're good. I like everything that goes into them. But whenever you're talking about whether it's sports betting, DFS, whatever, when you're talking about using your own projection models, the more like you're moving toward the extremes, the more likely you're just going to be wrong. So if I'm getting the Bobby Witt and we haven't projected for 0.4 stolen bases, you're very vulnerable, susceptible at that point to, okay, well, what if your stolen base projection is just wrong? Does Bobby Witt still look good? Whereas if you're getting 20% Bobby Witt and you have a very reasonable 0.23 stolen base projection, you're less susceptible to, oh, well, I was just wrong on this category and that's why I got so much. So very reasonable stolen base projections on him and Garcia, and still getting to them, which actually sort of makes me like them a little bit more. Salvador Perez, I'm in line with the field at 11%. Other than that, I'm not getting into too much of Kansas City. I'm about half the field on India. 3,400, I'm getting 5%. Almost like a direct pivot kind of to Nick Gonzalez. Similar price tag. I think Gonzalez is like $100 more at second base. Gonzalez getting like half the ownership of India. I'm playing like twice as much Gonzalez as India. I think they have a very similar range of outcomes. I don't mind that at all. It's basically like a 1-to-1 pivot. Caglioni not getting any ownership. I'm getting 3%. He's getting 3%. Pasquantino is getting 7%. I'm only at 2%. He's reasonably priced at 4,300. I don't mind these other KC guys, but to me, the priorities here are Witt, Garcia, and Perez, as they normally are. One last thing to mention with Heaney, again, small sample size, but he has allowed a 240 actual ISO and a 242 expected ISO to lefties this year. The bulk of the damage done against Heaney has actually been left-handed bats. So if you are thinking about playing Caglioni or playing Pasquantino, don't let the lefty dissuade you. It's actually been a positive so far against Heaney. TTID said, I arrived late. Are we in for fits? I think I had like 5% or something. Yeah, I had 5%, field at 5%. I had more Jansen Junk. I had like 9% of him, but I think they're very comparable plays. To me, it's you probably the thing about fits, and this applies to Junk as well, and it applies to cheap pitching on the slate in general. Good offenses are cheap enough today that I don't think you really need to pay down for pitching that much, because you're leaving yourself very open to getting a good point per dollar score and it being completely irrelevant, because the best point per dollar plays are the offenses with 5+ team totals where everybody is $4,100. I don't think you need to pay down for pitching all that much today, but in lineups where you do, obviously taking a breathing human pitcher against the Rockies is going to be perfectly fine. Toronto taking on the White Sox. I don't know why I jumped all the way to Kansas City, but Toronto taking on the White Sox in Chicago. We have my computer being weird. We have Jose Barrios and Sean Burke going in this one. No ownership coming into Burke. About 10% coming into Barrios. And this goes right back to... Oh, I was going in order on our screen for once. This goes back to what I was saying, when I was alluding to getting to Christopher Sanchez earlier. Jose Barrios is perfectly fine here at 8,500. You can see not a great point per dollar projection, not a great fantasy projection, but he's fine. Facing the White Sox is obviously a good matchup. Barrios is kind of just a guy at this point in his career, but just a guy against the White Sox is pretty decent. 21% strikeout percentage for Barrios so far this season, 4.16 xFIP. Again, just sort of a run-of-the-mill average pitcher going up against one of the worst offenses in baseball. If you want to play some Jose Barrios, perfectly fine. For me, I don't have him because at current ownership projections and with the way that we currently have, again, spoiler alert, Christopher Sanchez projected, I'm just going to click Christopher Sanchez basically every time. If Sanchez's ownership ends up being twice what it is now by the time we get the lock, then yeah, I'm going to come down on Sanchez. I'm going to end up mixing in more Barrios, mixing in more Noah Cameron, etc. But for right now, I'm just probably not going to get to too much of these 8 to 9K guys that are not named Christopher Sanchez because of the difference in projection being way bigger than the difference in ownership. And just to, I guess, illustrate it now, again, I'll just kind of spoil the fun later on. If we look at our pitching projections right now, we have Christopher Sanchez as the second highest projected pitcher on the slate. Now, I'll get ahead of it. Like, if you want to tell me that Yamamoto should be higher, I'm not going to argue too heavily with you. I will say I don't have an issue with the Sanchez projection itself. He's in San Francisco. He's really good, blah, blah, blah. I'll get to that when we get to that game. But even let's say you want to move Yamamoto ahead and drop Sanchez down, whatever. The difference here, like, let's even call this an 18-point projection on Sanchez, right? Going back to what I was just saying about stolen base projections. The further that we are away from market, the more likely that we're wrong. So let's just bring this down. So I'm call it like 17 and a half, 18 on Sanchez. That's still going to be several points higher than Jose Barrios is. And Sanchez right now is projected for like 15% ownership. Barrios is projected for like 10. In a situation like that, as long as that ownership holds, I'm going to end up just, again, preferring Sanchez almost every time. So that's why I'm not getting too much Barrios right now, or any Barrios at the moment. But again, if you are going into this and saying, well, I actually think Sanchez should be projected for like 15 DraftKings points, then yeah, you should be mixing in Barrios a decent amount of the time instead of Sanchez. But that's not the way that I'm viewing it right now. And so it is going to cost me a lot of these mid-range guys. And again, it also goes back to exactly how what your strategy is as far as your set of lineups too. Like, where exactly do you come in on the scale of playing basically an equilibrium strategy where you are just trying to basically be in line with how often players succeed versus how often are you trying, or how heavily are you trying to exploit the field and say, well, I have this really big gap in how I view Christopher Sanchez in this case versus how the field views him. And as a result, I think he should be, throwing a number out there, 30% owned. The field is going to play him 15%. So instead of playing him 30%, I'm going to play him 70% and really just try and punish the field for, in my opinion, being wrong on Christopher Sanchez. So it's where you fall in on that as well. Like, if you're playing more balanced and saying, look, I know the field's wrong, I'm going to be 2x the field because I think 30% is the correct amount, but I'm not going to go to 60 or 70%, then again, you're going to be playing Barrios around 10%, Cameron around 5 to 10%. But with the way that I'm approaching it right now, I am a little bit more aggressive in how I attack it. And so it is going to just cost me some of these mid-range guys, which I am okay with. But Barrios here does, again, just look fine in this matchup. Burke, I don't have any interest in. 5,500 is really cheap, which obviously is good, but really difficult strikeout matchup against the Blue Jays. They have the lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching, I believe. I accidentally got off that page earlier. But if I remember correctly, they are like hands down the lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching so far this season. I think Kansas City is second, pulling that back up now. But either way, a tough strikeout matchup for Burke. Don't need to go there. There are other cheap pitchers I would rather get to, like the ones facing the Rockies or the Reds. 17.5% K percentage against right-handed pitching on Toronto's active roster. Kansas City is second at 18%. So that gap has closed a little bit lately. But either way, not looking to get there. Toronto bats against Burke. 14% ownership coming into Springer and Guerrero. I'm in line with both of them. 5K price tag on Springer, 5,200 on Guerrero. So far this season, right-handed hitters against Burke, 284 expected ISO, lefties 164. We have pretty drastic reverse splits for Sean Burke so far this season. It's the kind that I really like to try and target. Strikeout percentage against righties is 8 points lower than it is against lefties, and the expected ISO against righties is 120 points higher than it is against lefties. So to me, those are the best. Like, obviously, again, it's still a pretty small sample on Sean Burke, but I really like it when you get the drop in strikeout percentage and the increase in power allowed, as opposed to a lot of times you'll get, well, he gives up more power, but the strikeout percentage goes up. What that's telling you a lot of the time is he probably doesn't have great command, But when he is locating, he's got really good stuff. He's getting a lot of strikeouts. And when he misses, it gets hit really hard. When you're getting something like this, what you're getting with Burke, it's that he just doesn't have stuff that plays well against same-handed hitters, is what we're seeing so far. His curveball, he's thrown it 26% of the time to left-handed hitters. It's been hit pretty hard. 12% swinging strike percentage, though. Against righties, he's thrown it 15%, only a 6% swinging strike percentage. So that's probably kind of what you're seeing. He's throwing his slider 39% of the time to righties. The problem is it's not a very good pitch, it doesn't look like. 16% swinging strike percentage isn't nothing, but for a right-on-right slider, that's not really good. And it's allowed a 290 expected ISO. So he's really just showing he doesn't have anything that plays particularly well to righties. His fastball has gotten destroyed, 331 expected ISO. His curveball is allowed a 236 expected ISO. His sinker has a 195 expected ISO. He does not have a single pitch that he throws to right-handed hitters that has really any level of success whatsoever against them so far. So Springer and Guerrero, both expensive, but both look good here. Addison Barger, 9% ownership, 9% of my lineups. Third base and outfield eligible, 4,100. He will be hitting from the left side, where, again, Burke has had more success, but he gives you a lot of power. He has a 279 expected ISO against righties this year. He's only 4,100 with multi-position eligibility. Bo Bichette, 7% ownership, 7% of my lineups. Alejandro Kirk, 7% ownership, 5% of my lineups, 5% of my lineups, and 5% ownership to Clement. So pretty much in line with the field across the board on Toronto, but did want to highlight specifically the fact that Sean Burke just has nothing against right-handed hitters, at least so far this season, in his first time being used as a starting pitcher in the major leagues. So not only also, and this is something to keep in mind, not only does he not have anything that plays against right-handed hitters, he has to face them multiple times now. You're not talking about a reliever that comes in and just has to figure out how to navigate his way through facing Vlad Guerrero once. Now it's at least twice, probably. The White Sox would love for it to be 3 times. So you have that as well. Like, yeah, he can kind of maybe surprise Guerrero or Springer once, but got to do it more than once. And yeah, like Devin Scott said, Barger can get there against the bullpen. And that's something to keep in mind in general, too. Like, obviously, whenever you talk about a game, you're going to highlight the starting pitcher, but you're talking about 2, maybe 3 at-bats against the starting pitcher. And that's why, like, you don't want to get too into the weeds on matchups at the expense of who is underpriced for how good they are. And that's what you're getting with Barger here. Like, yeah, it's not a great matchup against Burke. It's not terrible. It's just kind of middle of the road. But you're also talking about a guy with massive power that's been very good offensively all season long and is still only 4,100. That's more important to me than Sean Burke is better against lefties than righties. So in general, pretty much even with the Blue Jays, but did want to point out the reverse splits for Burke. On the White Sox side, probably won't surprise anybody, but I am 2x the field on the White Sox. I hate it in general, but Barrios isn't a great pitcher, and the White Sox do have some talent at the top of the order. They're similar to the Rockies, where overall they're a really bad offense. It's a favorable pitching matchup, etc. But they are cheap at the top. Andrew Benintendi is up to $3,500, very, very slowly coming up in salary. You have reverse splits from Barrios so far this year as well. That's a change from years past. He used to be the exact opposite. But a 24% K percentage to lefties for Barrios, only 18% to righties, 269 expected ISO to righties, 152 to lefties. Perfect world. We're grabbing some right-handed power here, I think, from the White Sox. It's not a perfect world, especially when you talk about the White Sox. But Benintendi, again, just going back to the talent versus salary argument, 203 plate appearances against right-handed pitching this year, 244 expected ISO, 14% strikeout percentage. He's always been somebody that puts the ball in play. He's never really hit for much power until this year. And suddenly he's hitting the ball hard. He's doing damage. He's 3,500, 4% owned. I'll go to some Benintendi. I like Miguel Vargas here. The only thing that sucks about Vargas is that he is only first base eligible now. You don't have first base, third base anymore. But he's 3,600. He hits from the right side. He has some stolen base ability. He also has a 189 expected ISO against righties this year, which is pretty good, especially for that salary. Mike Tauchman getting 4% ownership. I have 8%. I'm getting to 7% Medraw, 7% Baldwin, 5% Teal. So again, the White Sox aren't a team that is going to make or break my night, but I am a little bit over the field. If I look quickly at how exactly I'm getting to them, it is pretty spread out. I thought it was a team that maybe I'd just be mixing in, two mans, but like 5% of my lineups are 5-man White Sox stacks, 3% are 4-mans, 2% are 3-mans. So normally when I go to the White Sox, it does look like I'm full stacking more than mini stacking. And that does make some sense too when you think about a team as cheap as the White Sox, because with as cheap as they are, if you do get, let's say, a good game from Benintendi and Vargas and Teal, just grabbing 3 random hitters, you're getting more at bats at that point probably for everybody else, and kind of everybody becomes underpriced, because a big reason that all the White Sox are cheap is that even though like Benintendi is more talented than his salary, Vargas is more talented than his salary, as a whole, the offense sucks, and they're not likely to get through the lineup that many times. So everybody ends up being cheap. If a few of them have a good game, then you are pushing the lineup more, rolling it over, getting back to the top, and getting more at bats for everybody. So I am getting to them more as full stacks than mini stacks. Dodgers taking on the Brewers in Milwaukee. For the Dodgers, it is Yamamoto. For the Brewers, it is Peralta. So 2 good pitchers in either mediocre or just flat out terrible matchups here, depending on which one you're talking about. $9K price tag for Peralta, $10,500 for Yamamoto. I'm not getting to either of these guys, but the field is 28% ownership coming into Yamamoto, 17% coming into Peralta. Part of me not getting to them probably has to do again with Christopher Sanchez and just being projected higher than both of them. But for Yamamoto, the matchup in terms of run prevention against Milwaukee is not bad. They have a 98 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. That ranks 24th. They don't strike out a ton, though. They are 21st in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this season. I do want to take a look at how many batters right now we have Yamamoto facing. So we have him at 24 batters. Yamamoto is somebody that I always want to pay attention to, that because he's had some weird stuff in the past with how many batters he faces, and sometimes that'll have our first run of projections on him come in a little bit low. But facing 24 batters, I think, is a pretty reasonable projection. He did go 7 innings last time out, still threw 98 pitches. He's been throwing 90 to 100 pitches more often now. He's actually thrown 100 plus in 2 of his last 4. Also, his 2 starts ago, he went 5 innings against the Rockies, threw 56 pitches. That was a rain delay. So I might end up bumping Yamamoto a little bit just because that 5-inning start, I'm sure, is pulling down our batter's face projection slightly. But I think it's probably also in part just the strikeout matchup here against Milwaukee has us a little bit lower on Yamamoto. We still have him as the 3rd highest projected pitcher here. Again, I think if you wanted to say, maybe he should be a little bit higher and Sanchez should be a little bit lower, that's at least a reasonable argument. But I'm not getting the Yamamoto at 28% and at 10,500. If he puts up a score that I have to have at 10,500, so be it. He's obviously a good pitcher, though. If you want to play some of him, great. He is really good from a talent standpoint so far this season. Yamamoto has the highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 28.5%. He has a 3.03 xFIP, 2.51 ERA. He's a very, very good pitcher. I will highlight that strikeout percentage too, though. It is the highest on the slate, but it's not really a $10,500 strikeout percentage. Part of that salary is also his run prevention, which obviously is fine. But just from a strikeout percentage, like, he's really good. He's not, $10,500 salary good. On the other side for Peralta, again, like, if you're lower on Sanchez, you should be playing more Peralta, because if you're lower on Sanchez, there's not a lot of mid-range pitchers that are great, and Peralta is one of the most talented. Even though the matchup against the Dodgers does suck, Peralta's strikeout percentage is the 4th highest on this slate, behind only Yamamoto, Sanchez, and DeGrom. 25.5% K percentage, down slightly from last year, but still pretty good. He's a good pitcher overall, but he's facing the Dodgers, and he's relatively popular. So I'm not getting to much of him. I have like 3% right now. Maybe it changes a little bit throughout the day. But again, this just goes back to he's projected for the same ownership as Sanchez, and I think Sanchez projects better by a pretty decent margin when you factor in the park and the matchup. The Dodgers, obviously Peralta is capable of having a big game against anyone, but the Dodgers active roster ranks 20th in strikeout percentage. They rank 1st in WRC plus. It's a really tough matchup, and you're not really getting much of an ownership discount or even a salary discount on Peralta here. So two very good pitchers, two pitchers that are getting ownership, two pitchers I personally right now don't have a ton of. Obviously wouldn't be upset if that changed, but at the same time, I'm not super upset that I don't have them. I at least am comfortable and happy with why I don't have them and who I'm getting to instead. For the Dodgers here, looking at the bats against Peralta, they're not really getting much ownership, 5% or less across the board, with the exception of 15% ownership coming into Shohei Ohtani. I'm getting the 27% Ohtani. So I do like that, if I'm not going to play Peralta, I will get 2x the field on the best hitter going up against him. It's not a good matchup, but Ohtani is obviously just an amazing hitter. 412 expected ISO against right-handed pitching this year, 460 expected WOBA. So I'm 2x on him, but not really getting to the Dodgers otherwise. I'm right there with the field, like 5% or less on the rest of the Dodgers bats. For Milwaukee, 2% Caleb Durbin, 2% Chourio. Those are the high marks for me. They're not getting any ownership. I'm not getting to them. I think this is one of those spots where even though I'm not getting Yamamoto and, not getting Peralta, for the most part, I'm fine just kind of hoping for the middle ground where Yamamoto pitches well, Peralta pitches well, but Sanchez beats Peralta. Yamamoto doesn't put up a score that I need at 10-5, and you kind of can just get away with not having a lot of this game in general. Bonus points for me if Ohtani happens to hit a home run or two against Peralta. Cleveland taking on the Astros in Houston. Somebody just asked about Colton Gordon. 3% projected ownership coming into a 7K Colton Gordon. 14% coming into a 7K Tanner Bybee. I'm basically flipping that and getting to 11% Gordon and 4% Bybee. And it makes a lot of sense if you look at how we have them projected. Our fantasy projections on both of them are pretty solid point per dollar wise, almost identical. So yeah, if you tell me that the field's going to play Bybee 4 to 5 times as often as Gordon, it makes sense that I'm going to just play Gordon more and try and take advantage of that gap in ownership. I think that they are both pretty solid plays here. Cleveland has been absolutely allergic to hitting lately. Obviously, that'll change sooner than later. But Gordon is actually, I think, a decent pitcher here. He has been much, much better against lefties than righties. You are likely to get a right-handed heavy Cleveland lineup, I would think. Although the projected lineup I'm looking at is more balanced. Kwan is left-handed. If Manzardo's in there, that's a lefty. If Schneeman's in there, that's a lefty. Jones and Naylor would both be benefits. So actually, let me see what lineup we have in right now. Yeah, we have the more right-handed heavy one. We have Schneeman, Naylor, and Kwan as the left-handed hitters. If you were to actually get a lineup that has more lefties, then that projection on Gordon should just go up. He has only struck out 18% of righties compared to 32% of lefties. He's allowed a 187 expected ISO to righties, sub 100 to lefties. You want as many lefties as possible in this Cleveland lineup if you are playing Colton Gordon. But assuming it is the right-handed heavy lineup, it's not a great spot, but he is cheap and good enough. I talked about it the other day, but one thing I do like about Gordon and just in general, when you talk about pitchers at cheap price tags, is usually if a pitcher is, in the 7K range, it's not somebody that has great stuff or great strikeout ability because it wouldn't be 7K. I do like if you can at least point to some above average thing, whether it's like one really good pitch or in the case of Colton Gordon, his location plus grade so far this year is 110.9 through 45 innings pitched. He has shown elite command so far. So again, that's something that isn't generally going to correlate to a ton of fantasy production because if he's not getting strikeouts, it doesn't really matter that he's locating really well. But generally, if you have really good command, at least you're not going to be putting a bunch of extra guys on base via walk, which really matters on DraftKings where you lose points for walks. But also, you're just a little bit less likely to make those mistakes in the middle of the plate and get hit really hard. The better your command is, the more likely you're going to be able to at least induce some soft contact, have favorable outcomes, even if they're not strikeouts. So not somebody that you're expecting to rack up Ks, but I do like that he at least does have one very, very good quality so far through his time in the major leagues. Bybee on the other side, I think is underpriced at 7K for what we've seen from him in the past. Now, so far this season, his strikeout percentage is only 21%. That's down from 26% last year. I do like that for the most part. We haven't seen huge drop-offs in other metrics, though. And he's thrown 98 innings this year. So to be clear, you should be looking at strikeout percentage first and foremost when you're trying to project his strikeout percentage today. He's thrown enough innings where strikeout percentage is what you're looking at first. But there's a lot of the time, like if you see that 5-point drop off in strikeout percentage, you're going to get a drop in stuff. You're going to get a big drop in command. You're going to get a drop in velo. We haven't seen too much of that from Bibee. Stuff plus this year is actually slightly higher than last year. Location plus is lower than last year, but it's not a huge drop. Velo is almost identical. So we're not looking at a pitcher that just doesn't have it anymore. We're looking at a pitcher that hasn't been getting strikeouts. So I think Bibee is fine, but again, there's two things here. Like if I'm playing less Sanchez, I probably play more Bibee. Also, if ownership between Bibee and Gordon starts to converge, then I probably get to more Bibee. But right now, with the big gap in ownership between the two of them and the way that you can see on the screen they're projected, pretty obvious. Like, yeah, I'm going to just click Colton Gordon if I'm getting basically plus money between the two of them on Gordon. Alan said thoughts on Marlins Reds game stack on DraftKings single entry. Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, again, it's always hard to answer questions like that because realistically, you can ask almost any like team stack or pitcher or whatever, and you can find plus EV lineups with whatever it is you want to play. So the answer is kind of always like, yeah, that's fine as long as you find a good way to do it. But answering it in terms of like, do I actually like it? Yeah, like I'm high on Miami. I like the ballpark. I think the Reds are fine, although I do like the Miami side more. So, yeah, perfectly fine with that. And in single entry, I would expect, again, ownership to like be funneling more to the Red Sox than to Miami. So that should, look good there as well. If we look at the offenses here, starting on the Cleveland side, 9% ownership coming in to Jose Ramirez. He is the highest owned Guardian bat right now. He is my highest owned as well. 15% of my lineups have Ramirez, so I'm a little bit over the field on him at 5,500. Like I said, Gordon hasn't been great against righties. 187 expected ISO, 18% strikeout percentage. Ramirez so far since the start of last season against left-handed pitching, 208 expected ISO and 277 plate appearances. So I do like that. Carlos Santana, Angel Martinez, 5% Santana for me, 1% Martinez. David Fry was not in the projected lineup for SaberSim. He is somebody that if he is in the lineup, will probably have a pretty good point per dollar projection. You can see that he does for us. I will mention the thing that always pops up with David Fry, 0.39 pinch hit percent for him. He's always going to be, when he gets these starts against left-handed pitching, a good point per dollar play. But when you think about the range of outcomes, you always want to keep in mind that he probably is not getting at bats once a right-handed pitcher comes into the game. And really what that does is kind of just like, if you think of it, as like a chart, high pinch hit risk guys, in a lot of cases, you kind of just funnel back to like, are they popular? If they're popular because they're a good point per dollar projection, but they also have a high pinch hit risk, it's usually going to be something that I really want to avoid in tournaments because the payoff isn't high enough to be worth the fact that he's probably hitting like twice. If he's low owned, then the payoff is at least better. I'm a little bit more inclined to say, yeah, I know he's probably not getting 4 at bats, but he's 2,600. If he homers in one of his first 2 at bats, I don't really care if he gets a 3rd or a 4th at bat. So ownership just kind of becomes like an even bigger weight when you're thinking about guys like that. But I will, just mention David Fry, always going to have a very high pitch hit probability, always going to be a good point per dollar projection as well, though. On the Houston side, against Bibee, sub 5% ownership to everyone on Houston. Altuve leads the way at about 5%. I'm a little north of that, but nothing too crazy. 5 to 10% on Christian Walker, Isaac Paredes, Yainer Diaz, and Jose Altuve. They're just all relatively high upside hitters at favorable price tags. 3,400 for Christian Walker. Hasn't been great this year, but we know the type of power upside that he has. Paredes, same thing at 4K in a ballpark built for where he hits fly balls. Yainer Diaz, 3,300. Again, not a great season so far, but does have a lot of power, especially for a catcher. Altuve finally coming around, 4,500 second baseman. I'm getting, like I said, 5 to 10% of them, 4% Jake Myers, 2% or less everybody else. So getting to a little bit of Houston, a little bit north of the field on Diaz, Altuve, Walker, and Paredes, but nothing too crazy there. So far this season, I mentioned Bibby's strikeout percentage is down. Righty's only a 146 expected ISO against him. Lefty's only 174. So again, it's not that he's turned into like a totally incompetent pitcher. He's just turned into somebody that, for whatever reason, isn't getting as many strikeouts as he used to. In a lot of cases, that's by design. Not so much these days as in the past. For the most part, pitchers and teams have figured out that strikeouts are good, and the fewer balls put in play, the less chance you have of getting unlucky. But you do still at times see pitchers or teams decide that getting quick outs is better than strikeouts. Normally, again, it's not a great idea, but maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just something else. But he hasn't turned into like a horrible pitcher. He's just turned into not as good of a strikeout pitcher. See you looking said Teal, Benintendi, Talkman for a 3-man. Yeah, perfectly fine. Or Friedel, Benson, Herrera, I guess paired with a 5-man. I mean, this is one of those, like, either of those are fine. I have more exposure to the Benintendi side just because I think Benintendi is like criminally underowned pretty much every day. But yeah, either side of that is okay. I would also lean the White Sox side, I think, just because you are getting more hitting upside at catcher, I think, from Teal than from Herrera. Like Friedel and Benson are good. They offer a ceiling as well. But I think Talkman and Benintendi are good enough that the gap there isn't huge. I think the range of outcomes gap on Teal is a little bit bigger. But again, I think they're very, very similar. You also obviously have a little bit more correlation in the White Sox one since you do have that 3-man. For moving on to the Rangers and the Angels, highest projected pitcher on the slate, Jacob deGrom, taking on Yusei Kikuchi at 7,200. These are going to be two of the most popular pitching plays on the slate. You can see the very good pitching projection on Kikuchi, who has turned things around after a very bad start for the Angels. He's getting back more in line with what we saw last year. deGrom, I was talking about it the other day. He's down across the board compared to what he was last year. But when you're somebody as good as Jacob deGrom, being worse than you were is still, in a lot of cases, better than almost any pitcher in baseball. And that's what you're seeing with deGrom. So even, with that drop off from last year, he's still, and, just other points in his career, he's still a very, very good pitcher. Now you get this strikeout matchup against the Angels as well. This team strikes out a ton. They do have a lot of power. So, if you do get deGrom just having like his B stuff, then yeah, there is risk that the Angels just hit home runs and, it gets ugly. But this team strikes out a ton. The only team striking out more against right-handed pitching this year is the Rockies. So Angels are second with a 26% K percentage against righties. Third, for comparison, is Boston at 23.7. So there's a big drop after Colorado and the Angels to anybody else. And you get deGrom, who comes in with the third highest strikeout percentage on the slate, behind Yamamoto and Sanchez at 25.9%, 108.7 stuff plus grade, 110.3 location plus grade. Again, all of those numbers are down from last year. 121.2 pitching plus grade is down 10 points from last year, but it's still the best on the slate by 9. Sanchez is second at 112.7. Just speaking to how, saying, oh, well, deGrom is starting to age doesn't mean a whole lot because he's still so good. So Jacob deGrom looks fantastic. Projected for 48% ownership right now. I'm getting to 46%. I would not be surprised at all if that ownership number on deGrom actually ends up either being projected higher or, again, just coming in higher. Just like the Red Sox, he stood out in some stuff I was looking at earlier as just getting pushed by publicly available sims. I think there's a good chance deGrom's actual ownership here ends up being like 60% instead of 45 to 50. But again, it's one spot in your lineup. I would be very aware in large field tournaments, especially where you have to beat a lot of different lineups. I would be very aware of how often I'm playing Jacob deGrom plus Red Sox stacks. They're going to project incredibly well. Sims are going to tell you they're great, especially if you're using ownership numbers that are too low. I'd be really cautious of how often those are going to be paired together. But if you're going to a low-owned offense, I don't really care that much that deGrom is 60%. He's the highest projected pitcher on the slate. He is in a great matchup. I'm getting the 46% right now. Also getting the 40% Kikuchi, 25% projected ownership. I also think that number might be low. Wouldn't be surprised if you end up like 30, 35% Kikuchi instead of 25%. Maybe even he pushes 40. I kind of doubt that. There are enough other mid-range options that people will want to play at least somewhat. But both pitchers in this game are going to be popular. Both are probably being a little bit under projected in terms of ownership. But the nice thing about pitching versus hitting is you're talking about one or two spots in your lineup. You're not talking about half of your lineup, a 5-man stack taking up 50% of your roster spots, all being under projected. And then also from a combinatorial standpoint, all being owned together at a high percentage. It's just a lot less problematic when you talk about pitching ownership compared to hitting ownership. And that's without even getting into the fact that even though there is still obviously a lot of variance, pitching projections have less volatility than hitting projections do. So I'm less concerned about ownership on guys like DeGrom and Kikuchi than I am on the entirety of, for example, the Red Sox offense. Both these pitchers look good. 46% of my lineups getting DeGrom, 40% getting Kikuchi right now. Offensively, starting on the Texas side, I am over the field there. So I am kind of playing both sides of this one with the Rangers and with Kikuchi, which I am okay with because we do know Kikuchi gives up some power. He gets a lot of strikeouts, but has allowed a 207 expected ISO to righties this year, 23% strikeout percentage. Wyatt Langford getting 8% ownership, Semien getting 7. I'm about 2x the field on both of those guys. 5% ownership coming into Adolis Garcia. I'm 2x on him. Corey Seager, Kikuchi's been lights out against lefties. 30% strikeout percentage, sub 100 expected ISO. But Corey Seager is only 4,300 and he is good. Definitely makes sense, especially in Texas stacks. Like once you start making the assumption that Kikuchi doesn't pitch well, may as well throw in Seager. Hope you get to the bullpen early. You get some advantageous matchups later. I'm getting to 11% Seager, 9% Heim, 8% Haggerty, 6% Berger. So I'm over on Texas. Nothing too crazy. Mostly like 2x the field on most of these guys. Doesn't get me enough of them where, if they do poorly, I'm in trouble. But I do like, especially when you consider the salaries here. This is like the inverse of, the Dodgers and Peralta, where the Dodgers are expensive. Peralta's relatively expensive. It's very easy to find that middle ground where Peralta's good, but not great, but nothing from the Dodgers really matters. Here you have a $7,200 very good strikeout pitcher in Kikuchi, and then you have a Rangers team where there's two hitters priced above 4K. Corey Seager at 4,300 and Haggerty at 4,100. There's not a big margin there for Kikuchi to not be good, especially when you consider the way Kikuchi gets outs. He's not somebody that generally gets, a bunch of ground ball outs, goes 6 innings, 3 strikeouts, 14 fantasy points. He's usually striking you out or he's giving up power. And the Rangers are really cheap. Kikuchi's really cheap. Most of the time, you're getting either at least a couple really good Rangers plays or a really good pitcher score in Kikuchi. So this is a game where I like having both sides. I like having a high percentage of my lineups having either some exposure to the Rangers bats or having Kikuchi. Could be Travis said, do you know why there are so many games that are not included on the slate? I didn't even know there were. I hadn't looked. I would assume it's just the 635. Are they like 635 games? Normally, DraftKings just doesn't include those, which I don't mind on slates of this size. Like if you're still going to give us 9 games, it's just. Wait, what are you referring to? I'm seeing the Rays and Tigers at 640 being the only game not on the slate. TDID said, is it always minus EV to play Kikuchi and DeGrom together? Am I looking? Yeah, I don't know. I don't see what you're referring to. I don't see any of those games existing today. Like just looking on the ESPN page, I don't see them on the schedule. So to TDID's question, is it always negative EV to play Kikuchi and DeGrom together? From a lineup standpoint, no. You can absolutely make lineups that project to be plus EV with DeGrom and Kikuchi because the rest of your lineup makes up for it. There's negative correlation between Kikuchi and DeGrom just because only one of them can get the win. And that is just obviously always going to be the case because it's a hard and fast rule. But no, it's not always minus EV because you can find plenty of good lineups that have them together. Of the lineups that I would be playing if the slate started right now, I'm not sure that I can see. Yeah, it's not showing for whatever reason what percentage of my DeGrom teams have Kikuchi. Yeah, so can't answer how many I would have. SaberSim sets up a little bit differently now that they have the diversifier thing. But yeah, that's basically the answer. Like if I look at the SaberSim correlations, they have DeGrom and Kikuchi with negative 0.11 correlation. So like they negatively correlate, but it's not like they negatively correlate to the point where they're never good together or anything like that. So yes, they do always negatively correlate, obviously, but yeah, you can make plus EV lineups with them. In general, I'll probably still prefer to, if I have Kikuchi, find $200 for Yamamoto. If I have DeGrom, maybe that's a lineup where I pay down to a different pitcher or something. But they're fine to play together. It's not ideal, but you can make good lineups with them still. For the Angels here against DeGrom, not getting to them much. Neither is the field. Basically, sub like 2% or less ownership coming into the Angels. 5% Joe Adell, 4% Trout and Neto are the high marks for me. You do get that negative correlation, obviously, against DeGrom by going to the Angels the same way that you do the Rangers against Kikuchi. But there's two big differences. One, Kikuchi's good. DeGrom is DeGrom. So obviously your chances of success against Kikuchi are better than your chances of success against DeGrom just based on talent. But also it's the difference in pricing. DeGrom is $10,300. So it's a lot easier to explain how maybe you don't need Jacob DeGrom in your lineup, but you also don't need the Angels. Also, like Neto's $5,200. That would be the most expensive hitter on the Rangers by $900. Trout, $4,700 would be the most expensive hitter by $400. Ward is $4,200, which is basically, it would be the second most expensive on the Rangers. So Angels are a little bit more expensive, especially the guys you would want to get to, but also DeGrom being more expensive. You have that wider window in the DeGrom versus Angels matchup for neither side to really be useful. Whereas in the $7,200 Kikuchi versus free Rangers matchup, it's hard for just like, especially in a good hitter's park too, it's hard for none of that to end up being useful, especially when the pitcher is a good strikeout pitcher who also gives up a lot of power. You have like this polarizing range of outcomes based on what Kikuchi allows. So I really like having some version of Rangers bats or Kikuchi. But when it comes to the DeGrom versus Angels matchup, I'm fine with like either I have DeGrom or I just don't have any of that. Arizona taking on San Diego. In San Diego, for the Diamondbacks, Zach Gallen at 7,800. For the Padres, Yu Darvish coming in at 8,300. Kind of mediocre projections on both of them. You can see we have identical 1.6 fantasy point per dollar projections there. Sub 5% ownership to both. I'm not getting to either one. 5% coming in to Gallen, 3% coming into Darvish. Really unappealing matchup for both guys. If you're going to either one, the case would simply be that they are talented, but the matchups are pretty unappealing. Darvish is, again, 8,300, but the Diamondbacks this season against right-handed pitching rank 19th in strikeout percentage. They rank 4th in WRC+. The Padres are down to 15th in WRC+, but they also rank 28th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. So not really interested in getting to either one of them. Again, if you are, it's simply just talent versus salary. But the matchups leave a lot to be desired. Also, Darvish's first start of the season and all the volatility that comes with that. Gallen so far this season has not been great either. Striking out 21.9% of hitters. That's down from 25% last year. A little bit of a drop off in his stuff plus, which never grades out well because of what he throws. But it is still down a little bit from last year. Location plus grade command has still been very good. So mostly still the same pitcher he has been in the past. You probably see more good starts from him going forward. But matchup here is really tough. Offensively, Arizona, I'm getting about 5% Carroll, 4% Marte. I'm not getting much else there. 9% ownership coming into Carroll, 5% coming into Marte. Everybody else sub 5%. If you want to go to the Diamondbacks because they're a really good offense and who the hell knows what you're getting from Yu Darvish in this start, the upside is obviously there at low ownership, but they are also pretty expensive. 5,800 to Carroll, 6K to Marte, 4,600 to Naylor, 4K to Gurriel. And on a slate like this, that does become a little bit more prohibitive because one, you don't have a lot of good cheap pitching. Two, you do have good pitching you want to pay up for. Even though I'm not getting to Yamamoto, he's obviously a very good pitcher that I'd be happy to have. I love getting to DeGrom. Again, same with Peralta. Like, he's a good pitcher. I obviously love Christopher Sanchez here. But then also you have these teams with like 5+ run totals that are just free. And so even if the Diamondbacks do have a big game, there's a pretty big chance that, one of these teams, the Marlins, the Red Sox, the Reds, the Blue Jays, for the most part, aren't super expensive. Kansas City has near 5 total. That these teams come through and kind of match Arizona, and then you're still at a disadvantage if you went to the Diamondbacks because of what the rest of your lineup looks like. So those salaries become relatively prohibitive here. On the other side for San Diego, 9% ownership coming into Tatis at 5,600. I do have 10% of him going up against Gallen. Obviously gives you a lot of home run upside, gives you stolen base upside. We have him projected for 0.23 stolen bases here, so that looks pretty good. Zach Gallen, I don't remember off the top of my head. I feel like he's either really good or really bad at preventing stolen bases. I'm pulling that up to double check. So far this season, 7 stolen bases allowed. So he's graded out as neutral so far this year. Last year, he allowed 18. He graded out as below average. Prior to that, he'd been average or above average for 3 straight years. So we've actually seen some volatility in that. So it kind of cycles back to like Fernando Tatis looks to run a lot. Good stolen base projection on him. Manny Machado getting 5% ownership. I'm 2x at about 9. I have 4% Cronenworth, 4% Bogarts. So for the most part, I'm not getting to much of San Diego. Neither is the field, but I am getting to about 10%, give or take, of Tatis and Machado. Obviously, 2 guys that you're always going to be happy to get to. So far this season, Gallen has, against right-handed hitters, not sure if it's going to load, so might not be able to answer this one for you. So far, 232 expected ISO to right-handed hitters, 24% strikeout percentage. Gallen has given up power this year. 221 expected ISO to lefties, 232 to righties. So has struggled a bit with power. And obviously, Tatis and Machado from the right side can take advantage of that. And then finally, wrapping this one up with the Phillies taking on the Giants in San Francisco. Huge projection on an $8,800 Christopher Sanchez. And on the one hand, like I said, I do think, you can obviously reasonably argue that you're a little bit lower on him. There are good projection sources that are lower. But I have a hard time really saying I think being this high is wrong. I don't have a reason that I would really think that when you dig into the changes that Sanchez has made this year, how good he has been, how good his stuff is. Then you factor in the park, you factor in the matchup. Christopher Sanchez has the second highest strikeout percentage on this slate at 26.2%. Last year, he struck out 20% of hitters. So you have a big jump in strikeout percentage, but you're at 100 innings pitched this year. You are at the point where his strikeout percentage this year is predictive of what he's doing going forward. You don't need to be regressing super heavily to what he's done last year. And then also when you look at some of the other, stuff metrics and stuff like that, there are very clear improvements across the board for Christopher Sanchez. Last year, he had above average stuff plus 106.6. This year, it's up to 114.1. He has the highest stuff plus grade of any pitcher on this slate, and it's not particularly close. Jacob deGrom is second at 108.7. His command this year has dropped off. 103.2 location plus last year, 96.8 so far this year. So obviously that's not ideal. I could actually spin that as a positive in a 1-game sample, though, if I needed to. Christopher Sanchez has seen a 6% jump in strikeout percentage this year while being worse at locating his pitches. If he actually locates well in a given game, he's borderline unhittable. So, you have just stuff that looks really good, underlying stuff that looks really good, backing up the increase in strikeout percentage. His fastball velocity is up nearly a full mile an hour this year to 95.3. miles per hour. He's pitching in San Francisco, which is one of the most favorable parks to pitch in. The Giants' active roster since the start of last season ranks 19th in WRC plus against left-handed pitching. They rank third in strikeout percentage against left-handed pitching. They probably are going to have a right-handed heavy lineup here, which in a lot of cases obviously isn't what you want if you're a left-handed pitcher. But Sanchez has a 26.7% K percentage against righties this year compared to 24% against lefties. 134 expected ISO, 295 expected WOBA to righties. Both of those numbers are lower against lefties, but obviously still very good against righties. He throws his changeup 41% of the time to right-handed hitters with a 24% swinging strike percentage. He has one of the best changeups in baseball. This is a pitch that plays well against right-handed hitters. The Giants are going to run a bunch of right-handed hitters out there. Yeah, he might not pitch well. It's baseball. Shit happens. I cannot point to anything that suggests our high projection on Sanchez is unreasonably high and like we're the crazy ones here. Again, if you want to like say you don't buy into him this season as much as we do, that's reasonable. Fine. Maybe from this point forward for the next year or two, he's closer to what he has been in the past. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the correct answer, but it's obviously a reasonable take. But I am perfectly fine. There are plenty of times we do this show and I look at our projection and I'm like, okay, I get it, but I'm uneasy with it. I'm uneasy with this one in the sense that I know the vast majority of the dollars I put in play tonight are probably going to revolve around Christopher Sanchez's performance. I'm uneasy with that. I'm not uneasy with our projection and our assumptions on Christopher Sanchez. I love him in this spot. I think pretty much every box is checked here. Now it's just a matter of can he go out there and execute? And, obviously baseball is baseball. Jenna said, Adam, could you start your lineups with Sanchez as your SP1? Yeah, absolutely. We have him as the second highest projected pitcher on the slate, and I certainly don't think you need 100% DeGrom. So, yeah, without a doubt, like Sanchez, Kikuchi, you have a massive ceiling. You can, obviously pair him with plenty of other guys. So, yeah, I love Christopher Sanchez here. He's in 70% of my lineups, projected for 18% ownership. Now, maybe that ownership number comes up. That is certainly possible. But one thing that I will say, and I kind of alluded to it a couple of times during the show in other spots, one, our projections just have less of an impact than other places like the bat, like Stochastic. We just have less users, which, again, in my opinion, is a reason to sign up using the link below for our projections. When they are right, your payoff is going to be better than when, projections that the vast majority of the field is using are right. But also, our projections are very, very different on Sanchez than other more popular sites. We are like 4 points higher than both of those aforementioned sites right now. So this isn't even like, we're a point higher and people are going to get pushed to Sanchez when they use other sites' projections. Other sites have Sanchez projected as just like a decent option here, very comparable to Barrios, to these other guys. Whereas we have them projected to be essentially the best, all things considered, the biggest edge, I guess, pitcher on the slate. So again, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. I am fine buying into Christopher Sanchez here. I love the spot. I love the way we have him projected. I love seeing that there's a big gap between us and everything else, basically. If I lose 80% tonight on Sanchez, so be it. I'll come back and do it again tomorrow. But I love getting to the spot on Christopher Sanchez. On the other side, tough spot for Landon Rupp. The park obviously is good, but tough matchup against Philadelphia. 3% ownership at 6,700. I'm not getting to him. For Phillies bats against him, not getting to too much of them either. Bryce Harper in 3% of my lineups. Trey's in 3%. Those are my two highest owned guys. They're the two highest owned guys for the Phillies as well, both getting about 5%. But it's San Francisco. It's a tough place to hit home runs. Obviously, you can go to the Phillies. Like, they are really talented and all of that. But you do run into that same issue that I was talking about with the Diamondbacks as well, where because they're expensive and at least, a few of these guys, Harper, Turner in particular, and Schwarber, being north of 5K, even if the Phillies do have a good game, you still then have to have had all these other cheap teams not have good games. So they're a pretty tough one to get to, even though they are talented. And then I think it probably goes without saying that I am not getting to the Giants today against Christopher Sanchez, who I think is, all things considered, the best pitching play on the slate, the way things look right now. Thank you for the reminder, Gregory, because I 100% was going to forget about FanDuel. So I don't have FanDuel ownership in front of me, but pulling up our projections and looking at FanDuel pitching, DeGrom, highest projected pitcher, as you would expect, at 11-2. I assume you're going to get, and actually I can at least get a guess here. I'll pull up SaberSim ownership. My guess, and I'm double checking it now, is that you're going to get the opportunity to play Christopher Sanchez over Yamamoto at a fraction of the ownership. Right now, okay, so I'm wrong. At least, so SaberSim has identical ownership coming into Sanchez and Yamamoto, and then 2x going to DeGrom, which I think is fine. So I would expect to primarily be getting to DeGrom, Sanchez, Yamamoto, Kikuchi on FanDuel. Since you only have to roster one pitcher, obviously you don't have to go as far down the board. As far as like low-owned tournament guys, nobody's projected above 10% ownership other than those four. So, if you wanted to get to like a Barrios against the White Sox or Bybee at 8,100, any of that's perfectly fine. Obviously, lower probability plays. I assume Sanchez and DeGrom would probably end up being what I am building around. Like, I would probably have a bunch of DeGrom, and then there's a good chance, because we have that higher projection on Sanchez than Yamamoto, I would do something like just playing Sanchez every time the field would play Yamamoto and having something like, being 2 or 3x Sanchez, for example. But obviously, Yamamoto is really good too. You don't have to go that route. But I think those are pretty clearly the top four on FanDuel. DeGrom, Sanchez, Yamamoto, and Kikuchi. So now to wrap up with what I'm getting to everywhere on DraftKings. Again, keep in mind, early in the day, everything changes, blah, 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 blah. You can see the highest projected players for us here on the screen. And then my highest exposed players right now, Christopher Sanchez at pitcher, Sanchez, DeGrom, Kikuchi, far and away my top three. And then there's a drop-off where I'm just mixing in a bunch of other random guys. Offensively, starting at catcher, Agustin Ramirez, Hunter Goodman, Carlos Narvaez, my highest owned catchers. At first base, Shohei Ohtani, Vladimir Guerrero, Christian Walker, Miguel Vargas, my highest owned first baseman. At second base, Xavier Edwards, Marcus Semien, Nick Gonzalez, Romy Gonzalez are my highest owned second baseman. Jose Ramirez, Michael Garcia, Manny Machado, Isaac Paredes, Ke'Bryan Hayes, highest owned third baseman for me. Nate Eaton is not in our projections right now. He is a very, very good point per dollar projection if he's in at third base, but also I think likely to be one of the most underprojected ownership guys on the slate if he's in. At shortstop, getting to Bobby Witt Jr., Ellie De La Cruz, Trevor Story as my top three. So that's in line with fantasy projection. And then in the outfield, already mentioned Shohei Ohtani at first base. Jesus Sanchez, actually right now my highest owned hitter, period. Kyle Stowers, Wyatt Langford, George Springer, Fernando Tatis, my 5 highest owned. Obviously, when you look at fantasy projections, you get Tatis, or I mentioned Tatis anyway. You get those guys in the top 5. So team looking at stacks overall, Miami, Boston, Texas, Kansas City, Toronto, my highest owned stacks overall. Highest owned 5-mans right now, Texas, Boston, Miami, Pittsburgh, and Colorado. But again, Boston might actually even fall off for me a little bit more potentially once I increase ownership projections. But looks like a pretty fun slate. I think that there are a lot of ways you can go that look pretty good. Excited for Christopher Sanchez. Hopefully that works out well. Thank you for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups tonight. And I missed that Gregory specifically said small field 555 on FanDuel. Even more so, just would be sticking to the highest projected pitchers. Probably even more so leaning on Christopher Sanchez there and looking to maximize that. So thanks again for checking out the show. Subscribe to the channel, thumbs up button, all that stuff helps out quite a bit. And I'll see you back here again tomorrow.